All right, family. I'm gonna try to take a few minutes to let people get the notification that I'm actually live. We are going for this eighth chapter again. I know I talked a lot during the first one, and of course we got interrupted. They were able to get my truck running, and I was able to handle some business, and then get my self over here to have further repairs done on this truck. Yeah, that part, the bullshit. But I can't let my truck go off, so y'all know how that's gonna be. I'm gonna have to keep jumping up and trying to keep this thing on because of the situation here with my batteries and a few other things we found and some shit that wasn't done. Excuse my language. Um, so I'm trying to give people just a moment to know that I'm live and we getting ready to do this reading. So when I see y'all come in, I guess that's when I'll start. Um, Pretty sure they got some online educated school shit going on with that, but I don't care. Okay. You might share the same subscribers, but not everybody likes everybody. You know. So, uh, so hopefully y'all will be here soon. Should have checked to see if he was live. I'm sure y'all want to make sure y'all little $5 and $10 didn't go to waste. But y'all can send me $5 or $10 too. The Sisters Cash App for the sacrifice and labor of love that's going on around here with this history. Sorry, I'm wiping down a few things because got a little funky up in here. All right. So I hope y'all caught the narrative, you know, the correlations that were shown in the last video where we see certain things that translated to over here. Okay. Because folks would love to tell you that it's going to work just like this because they didn't looked at political history or political science or been around the Moors or been studying this stuff for 30 years. Whatever. Um, but I don't think it's going to do any of that unless we're well versed on what came before it. It's kind of like when I was in ministry, they used to tell us, hey, you stick to your script, whatever that chapter was, and um, you also read what's above it and what comes after it. And so when we talk about what's going on here in America, what we have, what they dealt with, and what we are dealing with, and even to know what we will need to deal with in the future, you have to know what precursed each and every part of it. And with people running around here talking about it's English law and common law, then you need to know what was going on in the common law venues that were going on and assess whether or not that holds true to you over here, because many of the things that people will say is common law and they this and they that and when people go down into them court systems, a lot of people are getting hemmed up because oops, it don't work over here. What you say? I've been reading on a Newport that never talked about Galveston, Texas. They was bringing immigrants that way before they started Ellis Island. That's interesting, Casino, because I'm pretty sure that Galveston would go with that one, with it's a gambling facility that was in Galveston. Okay. When I told you, hey, look this up, the history of gamblings or gambling in the US and in the UK. Yeah, Galveston pops up in there. That had me thinking about some stuff too, because I went down there in the truck and they had the firemen out there with their little Fez hats. Trust me, they didn't have a fireman hat. They had a Fez hat. That's what drew my attention to it, asking for donations. Mm-hmm. But Casino, that's where you got it from. Okay. Cool, cool. Yeah, we're gonna get into that. I mean, this reading is extensive enough. We're like halfway through the book, and I don't want to shirk this one to go jump on that one. But that casino history runs parallel with all of this stuff. Yeah, because they was gambling, and apparently, some kind of way, we lost. Okay, it's more than just some black and white shit. Um, yeah. So I don't know if you caught part one of this one. We only read a couple pages into that, and there were some commonalities in there between how people lost their inheritance, how they lost their land, how they fell into a certain status, male and female, Catholic and Protestant, Irish, Roman Catholics versus Irish. Yeah, it's a bunch of stuff in here. You know, I brought in on the last one two things that I want to roll with us into the next chapters, and that will be the oath of supremacy, which we saw in chapter 7, and the oath of oath of allegiance in chapter 8. Okay, because I think those are the precursors and are attached to what we call the Articles of Confederation and the Articles of Association and all that other stuff. Because even with the oath of supremacy, you know, we sit up here and we talk about white supremacy a whole lot, white supremacy and it's black supremacy and it, you know, race soldiers, all the stuff on that black white tip. And hidden within that, especially when you go from the 1800s to the 1900s, you find that when we go into the court system, thank you, thank you. What'd you say was the American Legion? Okay. You said I'm not going to, two other people made me look into a lot of history why way different and really at what happened. Okay, got you. Got both of you guys. Um, but when you go from the 1800s to the 1900s, when we go into the court system and they say, do you swear to blah, 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 and how they say now, do you swear or affirm? There was a whole narrative that floats with the so-called Jewish that they had, or Muslim, or, other than Christian, whatever the hell, because people was hiding all kinds of shit, where they can't swear because of the religious tenets, so they push to say, so they affirm. Now mind you, I will say the Jewish, the Hebrews, whichever way that goes, but that is also that's also tied to the Irish. Okay, something about the when I ran into that had a hint of Irish Catholic, Celts, Celts, and all that tied to it. All this goes hand in hand. Okay, same people, different distinction. Like I said, folks can't determine one white folk from another, just like they can't distinguish one so-called black person from another. Just like, I thought somebody would pick this one up by now. The Negro Seaman Act of 1822 that happened right before the Indian Removal Act. And my question was, which niggas? I'm sorry, which Negroes? Y'all talking Mediterranean Negroes, African Negroes, Spanish Negroes, French Negroes, European Negroes, Asian Negroes. Which Negroes were they saying they didn't want on this land? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or American Negroes. Because see, when I was growing up, it was American Negroes and American Indians before they got to Native American in some of them books. But, if you ain't in school reading something at a particular time, by the time you get to school, they in a different book and you might not catch that narrative. That's why we arguing with people over what a Native American is versus an American Indian. Just like the lady I was talking to in the middle of the night, we were talking about some stuff, bouncing it around because she was helping me charge my phone up. And she said, I told her, I said, you might think that I'm black and from Africa. I am not. I'm an American Indian. We got misclassified. And she's like, wow, that's interesting, this, that, and the other. Young girl. And I also educated her on the testosterone. Women can't raise a boy to be a man because of the testosterone. So we had that conversation too. But anyway, I told her, I said, technically, you're a Native American. I said, a Native American is anyone who was born here. That's the simple version, okay? and I was telling her about my catchphrase of Indo-Mexican, okay, and that I was running around looking for some outdoor Mexicans, okay, because Indo-Mexicans are East Indians who marry Mexicans, and then they bring in the dark hair, long skin, dark skin, or darker skin, black hair, two Indian French braids down their hair, masquerading as the Native Americans like Iron Eyes Cody, as opposed to us with our nice 9 ether hair for the short version. Okay. So we did a few things this morning, in relationship to this. Um, and we're gonna keep on pushing. What you say? You said, and why do they never talk about these so-called Africans that came here at the time? They had tribes, scars on their bodies to identify who they are. Yeah, that part. Okay, that part. Mm-hmm. Cause it's all kind of Negroes, but it's a Negro Seaman Act. Just to go back to that, you got the Negro Seaman Act of 1822. You got what was going on historically in the 1800s elsewhere and here, to here, if you would. And then you also have, let me think of what I'm trying to say here. You have the Sundry Free Moors Act that said, we ain't them Negroes. Okay. Yeah, that part. Okay. So we're gonna get this reading. Trying to wait for this truck to give me a little beep so I can hit the gas pedal, and then we can start reading and get about 15 minutes before we have to hit the gas pedal again. I am officially in line to go into the shop. What you say, Casino? You said you looked at that. You said you looked at that. Look, I looked at that is what I was talking to you about in the chat the other day. How crazy that was. Yeah, yeah. You know, folks be like, they can say what they want about me. I'm an Eastern Star. What was the last thing that I became? Oh, I became a Hebrew Israelite. Yeah, it's the last piece of slander that they threw up here. Okay. Um. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it only become a black thing now. It wasn't a black white thing before. Okay. And that kind of semen, brother, is Seaman or Amen. SEA like the water. Just saying. Just spell it right. You know these damn horny ass bastards be doing all kinds of things with everything. Okay. Let me see if I missed any comments and then we'll get to this reading. Okay. Yeah, but Casino, I'm glad you did look into that thing about gambling. Yeah, that's gonna be a good one. Give me a minute. I'm gonna pull this book up. Let me see. And Tanya Lloyd, tell me that ain't Mama Chi, okay? Because she's the only one that I know that puts in great continuation, okay? So, where is the book? I threw it somewhere. I know I put the book. Oh, it was right in front of me, okay? Yeah, we got a lot of stuff to get done here with this truck because it was 111 degrees yesterday. I'm not sure how high it's gonna be today. We got to get this truck able to run because I was scared I was gonna be in here burning up and suffocating, you know. Um, so we got to get this truck done. All right. So I'm gonna ask you guys honestly, if y'all didn't see part number one, do you want me to go back and start reading? Because we're only 1, 2, 3 pages in, um, as far as what was on chapter 8, part 1 from the earlier reading, or do you want me to just continue? Um, or do you want me to just continue from the page that I was on? Okay, and mind you, it wasn't 45 minutes of reading because I was tying some things in that's pertinent to this chapter that I think relates to things that happen over here. Page on, go from the page on. Okay, is that page on or is that page one? One, if you want me to start back over at the beginning of the chapter. Two, if you just want me to continue from where I was reading, which is on page 167. On. Okay. I think that means to continue on. So we will start just after the section where it talked about the Gavelkind Act, the act of, not the act of, but it's just a little bit of a precursor where it talked about the oath of allegiance, the Privy Council, penal laws, and the Gavelkind Act, where it talked about the discrimination too. Okay, where it talked about the discrimination or the unfair practices that they were using to disenfranchise the Catholics, and then we'll find, of course, that the Irish got disenfranchised, okay, as well, okay. Um, so we'll continue on from that. We'll continue on from that. We're starting at page number 167, chapter number 8, from the History of Ireland by Peter and Fiona Somerset Fry, okay. Um, too many correlations in that last chapter, okay. Too many correlations, and we are in the 1600s, late 1600s, going into, I think the last date we had was 1701, talking about the Irish Parliament. Let me also shoot this in here. When they say Irish Parliament, show you how this connects. If you guys ever remember me talking about assembly or thing, look up thing in, hey Potawatomi or Savage, hey, how you doing, baby? Um, look up the word thing in Wikipedia with assembly in parentheses, and you will see that the assembly, the Witanaga or Witanogies, the Witten, the Wada something, I can't even remember the words now. But all of these things relate to a political representative body that resembles the House of Representatives that we have over here now. Why is this important? Okay, because if I tell you it don't pertain to you, just like they was telling us we came from Africa, so that we would lose our inclination to be in America, because we were brought over here in slave ships and we didn't own nothing. We won't fight for our land because we think we're from somewhere else. The same is true with this, because when they say that that's not our government, that we had no holdings in it, no dealings in it, but we're just subjugated to it. Why are we subjugated to it? Because it's not because we weren't here, okay? It's because a system basically came over here. We still would have to identify whose system that is, um, you know, and why the so-called American Constitution is the longest standing constitution in the world, supposedly. Did it start over here? And if it started over here, y'all better start looking at the Irish, because they had tribes just like the American Indians did. The Tuatha had tribes just like the American Indian did. The Aborigine Indian, that's why that whole conversation and argument about who an Aborigine is and who an Aboriginal is and an Indian and all this shit, that's why that's problematic, because it keeps you from looking at the truth of what's going on. Because as this book said, as opposed to what has been said, they would say divide and conquer. In this book, it said divide and separate. I believe that was the word that they used over here. Okay. And then it also, in the last chapter, talking about something and regrant. Okay. I can't remember the words. Maybe I can run into it. The recusancy laws. Shoot. I don't see it offhand, but it was like it's something and regrant, which means they took their land from them and they gave it back. That's another similarity with over here, because when we talk about the Civil War, supposedly those lands were forfeited, if you would, another type of abandoned lands, and then they were taken back by the people that supposedly wasn't supposed to get the land, if you would. So we got to look at that term. Y'all got to go back in the previous chapters for that term. Um, Also, 1609 from chapter 7, under the Irish dispossessed, they had the Articles of Plantation, which relates to Francis Bacon's essay on plantations and what that is. They had the Oath of Supremacy that comes up in here, and I'm just trying to skim to find this one word. or this phrase. And if I don't find it in the next couple seconds, we're going to leave it alone. Just doing a quick look here. Quick look, and I don't see it. Just trying to skim the pages from the last chapter, but it's something and re-grant. Okay. No, I don't see it. All right, so let's continue this reading, and we're going to start on page number 167, and it starts as follows. Middle paragraph. Catholics were grossly hampered in business too. They were more heavily taxed than Protestants, restricted in their choice of premises to work in, and limited to the number of their employees, so that their businesses were prevented from growing. They could not vote in parliamentary or local elections or enter the government service in any capacity, however humble. They had no place in the judicial system. A Catholic plaintiff, and this is where we were when we left off. Yeah, that part, Savage. That whole part. Or either they know and they're hiding it. Okay. Okay. Excuse me. But a lot of stuff comes out in your DNA, not just how you look, but what you gravitate to and what you end up saying. Because Root talks about Latin and we were Roman so much that that's where I put him. Okay. Um, but let's read this. They could not vote in parliamentary or local elections or enter government service in any capacity, however humble. They had no place in the judicial system. A Catholic plaintiff had to be represented by a Protestant lawyer to come before a Protestant judge and a Protestant jury. The law employed and protected Protestants. It punished Catholics. It is a very famous statement of Lord Chancellor John Bowles and the Chief Justice Christopher Robinson declared, or in a very famous statement, declared, quote, that the law does not suppose any such person to exist as an Irish Roman Catholic. Okay. Naturally, many, end quote, naturally, many Catholics belong to the landed or merchant classes turned Protestant. Okay. They are not all prepared to be martyred for their religion any more than people are now. "'Tis sad," wrote a Catholic father, "to cleave to Calvin or perverse Luther, but the weeping of my children, the spoiling them of flocks and lands, brought steaming floods from my eyes." End quote. Such men were often hypocritical Protestants, time servers who attended what Protestant services the law required and went on hearing Mass privately in their homes. Now, this is interesting on two fronts. One, when he says in the previous paragraph, the law does not suppose any such person to exist as an Irish Catholic, that rings of Dred Scott for me, where they say there's no law that the black man has that the white man has to honor, okay, turning it into a black-white issue. And then this statement here where it says, just the last part, who attended, time servers who attended what Protestant services the law required and went on hearing Mass privately in their homes. That reeks of crypto Jews, what we put in the concept of crypto Jews, conversos, mestizos, and the like. Okay, you know, because people be like, "Fuck the Bible, fuck the religion, fuck Jesus," and then turn around and tell you you got to be moral according to the Bible, huh? Because they masquerading as some folks. All right, but let's continue. It says their children might still go abroad for a Catholic education. Nominal Protestants could not be prevented from sending their children abroad, but they were more likely to attend Protestant schools at home. Within a generation or two, much of the Catholic heritage was forgotten. Hmm. And see, with the Catholic heritage, quote unquote, being forgotten, let me see if I can understand how this comes in. Okay. So we'll go to the Coptic Christians from Ethiopia and say all of this stuff came out of so called a black race of people, right? However, the problem with that black race of people is that they're foreigners over there. Okay, that's the biggest problem right there, right? Um, but we'll hear the Holy Cat and what originally existed, and then we have the Roman Catholics, the Holy Roman Catholics, and the Catholics. Okay, all that shit that comes into play. Um, and we'll assume to a certain extent that they're one and the same, and they're not when you look at the history, because you got to look at, as the Moors have said, European history is world history, is our history. Okay. You got to look at that part of history. Fortunate like Miss Fontrice, she has been over there because she's a military brat. So she's been over there. She's went to the schools over there. That's why she said garage instead of garage. Just certain things like that. But she's been over there to have a little bit of education. So sometimes when I say some of these things, okay, when I say some of the things that I say, like I ran into this or I saw that, she'll be like, yeah, I remember blah 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 blah, and I'll be like, how do you know all this shit? Because she's got a little bit of a different education, as far as her family actually pushed the reading, the education, and the like. Her father is a teacher, so well, no, is he a teacher or a nurse? I think he was a teacher. I think he was a teacher, and so you know the more you know, the further you can go. I put it like that. And knowing this history is part of that. Okay, not just America declared their independence in 1776, but it didn't become official until 1883. But yeah, they didn't really. They just made a statement, and or the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, they sold Louisiana, but when you go into the deep history, no, they never did. They just let it go without saying that it was sold, that it was only the ports and it wasn't all that territory that people have come to believe that it was. Now, and also another thing that you can look at here is where they're talking about schools in this last chapter. Okay, how they were educated and taught in their homes, two different, they were bilingual, they were looking Catholic and being Catholic and looking Protestant or vice versa. And it's no different from the Indian schools, which we've always kind of related to. That's us being indoctrinated in schools as well. Same protocols. Okay. Let's continue. Bottom of 167. I apologize. I know last chapter I didn't talk this much. I just read the chapter. A little excited this time. You know, some things on my mind. So, last part of 167. The people of Ireland were once again divided into two nations. The Protestants, nearly all English or Scots, but including a few Irish families, comprised no more than a quarter of the population, which had increased by the beginning of the century to almost 2 million. Yet they owned nearly all the land, ran most of the businesses, filled the government and judicial posts, and provided both officers and men for the army and the navy. Their manners, customs, speech were English. Below them, unconnected with them by any ties of history, culture, or common interests, speaking the Irish of their forefathers and not the English of their conquerors, were the country's Catholics, a depressed, subjugated people without rights who lived more poorly than any other peasantry in Europe and felt for their masters little but hatred. Now imagine in our minds when we sit up and we go, fuck the Irish because of Tammany. Matter of fact, mentioning Tammany Casino, did you see where Tammany popped up in the history of gambling in America? Mm-hmm. That part. Okay. We'll go to the gangs of New York, but we won't go to the casinos of Never mind. Okay. But anyway, see how here we'll attack the Irish in many, many regards, but we ain't talking about the Catholics who this shit was actually against. Okay. Yeah, that part. Let's continue. In 1583, the Bishop of Meath had bequeathed his best cooking pot to the people of Dunboyne, Dunboyne, and they had queued up to use it. In England and in most other countries, the common people would have scorned such a benefaction. They had had adequate cooking pots for centuries. But the poor courtiers or cottars of Ireland, Cottiers, but the poor cottars or courtiers of Ireland, who formed the broad base of Irish society, had nothing. A century after the bishop's death, remember this is 1583, they were still living with their animals in tiny thatched cabins with the smoke pouring out of the open doorways as there were seldom chimneys and sleeping on straw. Now think about how that falls into our narrative of, oh yeah, they slept with their animals. Who were you talking about? Were you talking about who were you talking about? Were you just talking about the Irish Catholics or the ones who were in power who put them in that position when we start talking about the Moors had to educate them or they were Neanderthals? Who you talking about? And as it says in the Bible, Jesus I know, Apollo I know, but who are you? Okay, let's continue. Hungry and emaciated, with swarms of skinny children, their main concern was growing enough food, and they paid exorbitant rents for little plots of land where they could grow corn or oats, a few vegetables, and increasingly potatoes. I think we're getting ready to run into the potato famine, and like I said in the last one, why do they say that the shit that happened to Ireland and the potato famine was directly related to America? Mm, okay. A family of six could live off an acre planted year after year with potatoes. These little plots of land provided the courtiers with the only security they had, but it was a poor kind of security. There were a class of people in the Irish countryside described by Arthur Young, a English traveler, as your fellows with round hats, edged with gold, who hunt in the morning, get drunk in the evening, and fight the next morning, who made their living out of exploiting the courtiers. They were the middlemen, Protestants who discovered they could make huge profits out of renting large tracts of land from major landowners, generally absentees, and then subletting them in tiny parcels to the Catholic poor. Landlords with no responsibility and no interest in the land beyond the rents they could extract from their tenants. These middlemen were the worst element in the countryside. They traded on the poor courtiers' desperate need for land, and the courtiers and small farmers had no protection against them. Their rents could be raised whenever the middleman wanted, and they could be ruthlessly evicted and their cabins burned if they didn't pay. I'm sorry. Let me throw something out there and y'all just, go, things that make you go, try this one on for size. Mrs. O'Malley's cow in Chicago. Oops. Let's continue reading. The courtiers tried to supplement their income by doing casual work on the larger farms, but around 1715, a great deal of land was turned over from arable use to pasture, which required less labor. So they took to begging. When they had planted their crops in the spring and cut the turf for the next winter's fire, they wandered off to spread the sum. They to spend the summer migrating from place to place, very much as their forefathers had done when they drove their cattle to upland summer pastures 1,000 years earlier. Even employed, don't that sound like the wandering Hebrew Israelites? I'm just saying, niggas. Even employed people would spend the summer begging. Wages were so low that servants left their jobs and farm hands quit the farms to join the seasonal migration. Just to say here, to relate it here to some extent, if y'all remember me saying that uh, Masons from the mainland, while we were supposed to be in slavery, Masons from the mainland would go to the islands to make quick money harvesting sugarcane in the off season for a few pennies. Damn near a direct quote from what I was saying. So this is seasonal migration, if you would. So it says thousands of poor Irish would simply wander along the roads and paths, barefoot, ragged, feckless, and idle, living in the open and begging for their food less often from more prosperous wayfarers and the houses of the great than from other poor courtiers like themselves. What you saying? Casino. At least got the land that they didn't own. Uh-huh. I'm starting to think they are talking about the Amish. Why don't nobody put them in the story of here? Because I think the Amish said got their little piece of land and settled down and stopped trying to conquer people like the rest of the folks did. I think they just wanted a peaceable place to live. And if you think about the Amish, I would probably tie the Amish to uh, John Smith and them that rolled their asses over there to Utah. That's what I'm thinking. I'm not gonna pick on the Irish because if I was in the area and I needed a barn built, I'm calling the Amish. But anyway, I ain't mad at them. Just a little unnerved when I run this truck by one of them. Okay, and I think the Amish might end up being in there with the Quakers as well. But let's go further. It says most communities expected to support some beggars, generally about 10 in the winter and 30 or 40 between planting and harvest time. When courtiers had handed over two-thirds of their produce as rent, they still had to pay the government hearth tax of twos or threes a year. And I don't know if that's 2 shillings or 3 shillings. It's 2S or 3S. I'm not sure what that is, but they still had to pay the government hearth tax of twos or threes a year and their religious dues. The first of these dues, very much resented, was the tithe paid to the Protestant clergy of the established church, who lived in comfortable uh, parsonages up and down the countryside and attended to the spiritual needs of the upper class. Um, if you guys have not had a chance or an opportunity to listen to Master Fundi Fee's think tank that she did. We did one on tithing, which tied in a lot of things, including this when it talks about King Canut, especially the part that I brought in, King Canut, um, and what is this? Frank Pledge, and the 100th, which we find over here, ties it in very well. Okay. It says they seldom visited the hovels of the poor. Secondly, the courtiers supported their own parish priest. Protestants didn't want to stamp out Catholicism. They had far too much to gain from the subjugation of the Catholic population, whom they referred to as Catholic enemies, and exploited as a conquered race, to wish them to turn Protestant. And they believed that religion, any religion, spread civility and reduced the crime rate. How many times have you heard them say in the past week here on social media about being civilized? Who is civilizing who? Because when we talk about it, we're not talking about these folks. We're talking about the current government and the Indians or Aborigines, Americans, or U.S. citizens and Indians on a whole different level. But this is where the civility, let's give them religion to make them civilized, comes in. I'm just not under the belief that they were all pale skinned. It says in 1703, Catholic parish priests were asked to register with the government, and over 1,000 did so, including a number of bishops and friars masquerading as parish priests to carry on their work. Y'all see how that works? Masquerading as parish priests, but they were really what? Bishops and friars? Okay. Sounds like another set of mestizos, conversos, and matiz, whatever the fuck you call them, all that stuff. Catholic priests have been holding their services in old barns, okay, in gentlemen's houses and in the open, setting up altars on mass rocks and under trees. Now, when they tell us that we used to go down by the riverside up under the tree, Who were we? Just black folks? I'm just saying. Okay. After they were registered as they were allowed to recognize church buildings where their congregations could gather open. Wait. After they were registered, they were allowed recognized church buildings where their congregations could gather quite openly. Simple houses were put up for the priest and soon became landmarks. Parishioners paid for their priests to in grain and vegetables, milk, livestock sent to market, cloth they had woven, whatever they had, besides the usual fees for marriages, funerals, and baptisms. Now, I'll stop here and go into Arkansas, and we'll go into Henderson University. If you go look at that story, if you find the story that I found, there was some brothers and sisters like myself in Arkansas who could pay in such like fashion with their grain or whatever for medical services for Henderson University, and I believe that's Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and tie that story to McNutt House in the same location. It says, and the priest in return acted as their leader. He was generally a farmer's son. He so he understood rural problems with a superior education at Catholic seminary abroad, which enabled him to arbitrate in disputes, arrange for some kind of village schooling, negotiate on the behalf of his flock with the outside world, and organize relief during times of famine. After 1720, the presence of Catholic priests was tacitly accepted by the ruling Protestants, and in 1727, the Protestant primate, Archbishop Bolter, reckoned that there were 3,000 Catholic priests in the country as against as a mere 800 Protestant clergy, a telling testimony to the superior zeal of the outlawed Catholic Church. Notice here they call him a Protestant primate. This is also where I get the term that I had said before when they were talking about, oh, you descend from monkeys and monkey bones leading into DNA and all this shit, that a primate is a bishop. A bishop is a person that is over a certain territory. And you hear it. They're calling them a Protestant primate. Okay. All right. Ireland's third religious group, the Presbyterians. Let me stop before I go any further with this. When we speak of Synodia, coming from the Moorish paradigm, when they told us about how the government failed because of Synodia, which means that they failed to set a date for them to reconvene in the government, that the government became defunct at that time. When I heard it from the Moors, I heard about it in school, I heard about it with the Moors, and then I turned around and found that there was a place down in the South, okay, possibly around Richmond, um, or thereabouts, um, where this gathering, it was the same exact story. The only thing they were talking about the Presbyterians in that story. So this goes along with that. Ireland's third religious group, the Presbyterians, was also caught by the penal laws. Okay? The Irish Catholics and now the Presbyterians, which is an Irish religious group. Okay? The Presbyterians of the Ascendancy, as it came to be called, belonged to the established Church of Ireland, but the Presbyterians were dissenters. How many times have y'all been in the stories, because I'm remembering this now, that you run into this term, dissenters, proper noun? Well, now you know who they are, the Presbyterians. But now you also should know the history of why it was as it is. You said you still can't get over the Presbyterian primates? Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing about that, Casino, is that when you look at the origins of it, the tenets of the primates, bishops, clergy, this, that, and the other, they say the same goddamn thing that the people who say we descend from monkeys and apes say. They say they have a common ancestor. Yes, they do. We're reading about them now. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It says the English Test Act of 1673 already prevented them from playing any part in politics or local government. They had no votes and could not belong to the city corporations. After the passage of the penal laws, the positions of their ministers became, in some respects, worse than that of the Catholic priest. They were recognized by the crown. The annual Rigum Donum instituted by Charles II was still paid to them, but they could be heavily fined for celebrating the Lord's Supper. Marriages they performed could be declared invalid, and the children born of them bastards. And burial by Presbyterian rites were frequently forbidden. Catholic priests suffered less humiliation, though often persecuted. As Presbyterian ministers were not, they were nevertheless acknowledged to be priests and allowed to fulfill their priestly functions. Let me stop here and pull out burial by Presbyterian rites was frequently forbidden. I think they said the same thing, which it might be one of the reasons, I can't remember of who, but it might be one of the reasons why you find the funeral rites um, of the Masons, for one. And even in looking at someone like, let me see if I can get the names right. Uh, One guy's last name is Smalls, and not the one you see online, but some other Smalls that existed before him. And like Judge Joe Brown, that name Brown, because he doesn't have an E on it, so you can find those with an E. Another distinction would be green with 2 E's and green with 3 E's, but that's a different story. You find that with the Smalls and Brown narrative on the East Coast, that there was a problem, and I think the Smalls that you have online today might have referenced this, but I'm not sure. But that one group was too dark to be associated with another group, so they got pushed aside, and that's with the Smalls and Brown surnames of those people in that area. And if you look at it, Judge Joe Brown is rather light, whereas Professor Smalls is really dark to solidify that story. Okay. But anyway, and that had to do with cemetery and funeral rites. Oh, that came in here. Yeah, that was in a couple chapters back, Casino. Concubine showed up in here too. Um, Okay, so their priestly functions. The Protestant, meaning the chapter of this, the Protestant ascendancy and the ascendancy. The Protestant ascendancy saw the Presbyterians as a threat. The Protestant ascendancy saw the Presbyterians as a threat. The Catholics seemed poor and dispirited, the wretched remnant of a defeated nation, whereas the Presbyterians were tough, energetic, and self assured, hard headed, practical Scots who had come to Ireland because of the opportunities they saw in the country were acquiring cheap farms and opening up businesses. Yeah. Presbyterians built their meeting houses and attended services quite openly, sent their missionaries out along the Catholics, and set up their own church hierarchy under the Protestant bishops' noses. One exaggerated archbishop described how 4 or 5,000 Presbyterians would congregate for an open air service, generally the illegal Lord's Supper, and no government authority dared to molest them. Presbyterians were thick on the ground too. Most of those who made the short sea crossing from Scotland were peasant farmers, but there were many traders, artisans, and craftsmen as well. The numbers of Catholics and Presbyterians in the Ulster countryside were about equal, but the large new towns were peopled almost entirely by Presbyterians. A rising mercantile class of Presbyterians dominated the provision trade in Londonderry and the linen industry in the growing town of Belfast. Drapers who finished and sold linen cloth, storekeepers, carriers, leather workers, shoemakers, and tailors, all were Protestant. I'm sorry, all were Presbyterian. Okay, we're on page 161. What did y'all say? I appreciate y'all for uh-oh. Yes, I was running through that problem yesterday. Dragon canoe was a brown. Ooh, yeah. Hey, Savage, I was floored when I found Chief Saracen. Okay. Now he's mixed. He was mixed. Just like who's that Drew guy named for the Cherokee and a few others, because that comes out later in the history after they start mixing and mingling. But I was surprised to find Saracen of various different spellings, because with the Moors they would say, "Hey, we're the Saracens." Really? Then how come y'all don't fall under Chief Saracen? And why don't we talk about Chief Saracen and what the fuck he did down there in Louisiana and Georgia and Arkansas and all that stuff when we were losing land east of the Mississippi? Because he settled right in. Okay? What you say, Casino? Why in this history is always religious people set tripping with another trying to establish something? That's what they do, bruh. That's what they do. So it says the most conspicuous members of the Protestant ascendancy were the landlords who lived off their rents, hunting, breeding horses, attending race meetings, which were becoming very popular, and dispensing lavish hospitality. Notice how it said they're breeding horses and attending race meetings. Now, I don't know if they mean horse race meetings, because that was the next thing that came after breeding horses. But when you look at the history of gambling in America, you can see the splits. Please pay attention to the split of horse racing. As I was trying to say the other day, Hot Springs, Arkansas, that's a racetrack in the middle. It's built around a racetrack. Okay. Sometimes it looks like an arc if you go look at what Google has of it shaped out. It looks like an arc, but it's a racetrack down there. Okay. Goes right along with the gambling. It cost them to continue. It cost them practically nothing. Food came off the estate. Drink, which flowed very freely, was either the local whiskey or cheap wine smuggled from the continent, and servants were rarely paid money wages. In 1720s, the new landlords were already rich enough to build themselves fine country houses, off after the manner of English aristocracy, with parks and gardens round them and a wall to keep out the poverty of the Irish. So also when we start talking about castles, go back a couple chapters and see how that comes in. See how it was gifted to or supported the building of castles, because root word ain't gonna tell you that while he running around talking about we had castles over here. How'd you get them? Because there's a whole era where they were built. Okay, like they used to say, every closed eye ain't sleeping, every white person ain't white. Mm-hmm. And every castle ain't the same. Okay, it says, and someone claims to be AI cousin to man, yeah, they all over the place with that. They descendants of Jesus, related to Jesus, descendants of Pocahontas, John Smith, Moy Toy, Metacommon. Oh, it's so much shit out here. Okay, it was so much shit that I got tired of looking for any famous people that I was really related to, but I can't avoid the one that deals with my last name, which ties to the history of this country, the Revolutionary Wars, and the place where my family was born. I can't help but look at that one. Okay. But like I said before, the Boones were here before the Boones got here. Anyway, so they tried to keep out the poverty of the Irish. Country towns acquired a new elegance. The gentry built fine Georgian houses in them and assembly rooms for balls and concerts. Killarney became a fashionable watering place, but the center of Anglo-Irish social life remained Dublin. The first Duke of Ormond, Lord Lieutenant in Charles II's time, had been determined the city should have the magnificence due to the seat of government, and following his lead, the nobility had built townhouses round College Green and the ancient common, St. Stephen's Green, had been laid out as a residential square. Okay. Ormond's Georgian successors had a colonnaded Parliament House built, as well as a new facade for Trinity College and splendid staterooms in Dublin Castle. Especially during parliamentary sessions, Dublin was extremely gay with routs and balls and all the paraphernalia of 18th century fashionable life. But this imitation of English life was all too often not enough. Most landlords preferred to live in England and use the proceeds of their Irish estates simply to cut a dash abroad. Ireland's wealth was constantly being drained away. Nowadays, ex colonial territories made stringent laws to prevent their foreign settler populations taking their money out of the country. Colonial Ireland had no such protection. In the 17th century, the English government had occasionally rewarded its servants with a pension on the Irish establishment, and in the 18th century, the practice was greatly extended. Both George I and George II used the Irish pension list to provide for their mistresses, bastards, and German relations. And I'm going to make a mention here that I didn't mention George. I mentioned George today, but after I said it, I remembered that George wasn't mentioned in any of the preceding chapters. So now you see that George is also being mentioned here as well. Okay. It says pensions and sinecures, and I'll spell this word for anybody that want to look it up. I've never seen it before. Sinecures, sinecures, okay, in on Ireland were worth about £100, £100,000 a year, and rents going abroad to absentee landlords built up in the second half of the century to a staggering £700,000 a year. As the total annual revenue was little more than £1 million at about 1770, Ireland was losing the. I'm sorry, excuse me for my reading abilities today. I want to go in the back, but I can't relax real well. It says, as the total annual revenue was more than £1 million about 1770, Ireland was losing the amazing proportion of 4/5 of her income. Ireland's Protestant landlords, or the Anglo Irish as they came to be called, were certainly on top. But very early in the century, they realized that in the wider context of Great Britain, they were no more than the middle tier in a sandwich. What I'll add here is Anglo. While we say over here, we'll say Anglo Cherokee, and it becomes a fight. We'll say Anglo-Saxons, and then we'll give that to somebody else. And then here you see Anglo-Irish, and we're looking at where that information and how it comes in. Anglo-Irish, Anglo-Cherokee, Anglo-Saxon ain't no different from saying African-American. Same hyphenated, fucked up ass term. But one of the terms that jumped out at me, and I was like, well, where do these people come from? And many of you may have seen that when I was putting it in the chat some months ago. Where do the Anglo-Africans come from? Okay, because if it was something that so-called Africans and Pan-Africans really gravitated to, why they act like I never said it? Yeah, go look up Anglo-African. Okay, in early times, the Irish Parliament had dealt through the Lord Lieutenant with the King and his English Privy Council. During the 17th century, there had been a shift in power in England from the monarch to the English Parliament. It had not affected Ireland greatly after the Restoration, as Charles II and James II had both contrived to rule as far as possible without parliaments. But after the curiously named Glorious Revolution, which made William king. The English Parliament, instead of the monarch, chose the prime minister, and he was, of course, responsible to those who put him in power. The Protestant ascendancy found that the English Parliament, responsible only to the English people, was standing between their own Irish Parliament and the monarch. So let's look at this in relationship to common law. We'll say it's English common law, it's common law. But which common law? Because they're not trying to recognize the Irish common law. Ireland has their own history with the bombings and the this and the that goes on there. So we ain't looking at that. But is that part of the reason why some of this we English and the English law, this, that, and the other fails when it comes to over here? Because again, it's mixed and mingled, twisted and screwed, flipped upside down, turned inside out, to quote another brother's phrase. Okay? Because they got two parliaments. How does that work over here? Okay? We got the Lords Proprietors and the Privy Council and all these things in Parliament. All that shit ties to this shore, especially when you talk about Carolina, not the Carolinas, but Carolina, which was supposed to be a declaration where they said that the lands from the East Coast all the way out to California belonged to a certain people, but it was never claimed. Okay. And then you had people coming from the islands that decided we're tired of dealing with the bullshit that y'all got us dealing with the parliament. We gonna just go into the mainland and seek our fortunes there. That's where our shit also stems from. Okay. Them other brothers amongst brothers that were treated unfairly by their brothers, or should I say it another way, when the Scots denationalized the Irish. It's a lot of things in this narrative, family. Okay. Between their Irish Parliament and the monarch. Did we read that part? I'll read that again. Let me read what you said here. I was talking to someone about that the other day, but I didn't look it up. Matriarch and patriarch came from on that side of the world and is part of the parliament. Um, well, let me put it to you this way, Casino. In the Judeo-Christian Bible, they put Adam on top and the woman on the bottom. So much so, and you know this, so much so that the female entity of the Trinity, if you would, which is funny, becomes a ghost, as in the Holy Ghost, the feminine principle, which is controllable. Okay. Or should I say, it's the parasympathetic to the physical. Never mind. But anyway, in that Judeo-Christian Bible, they put the man on patriarchy on top, matriarchy on the bottom. In the history, you'll find that that matriarchy was not on the bottom, okay? And it may have come from over there. But here's the problem. The underlying thing in the Bible that does not get a lot of credence is that Adam and Eve were co-regents. They were equal, created at the same time, not one above and one below. So that's where the narrative gets to change, and they're able to make that distinction on separating the matriarch and the patriarch, putting one on top, the other one on the bottom, and then trying to rule the world with it. Okay, so let's continue. We're on the top of page 173, and I'll read this sentence here. So he was responsible for those who put him in power. The Protestant ascendancy found that the English Parliament, responsible only to the English people, was standing between their own Irish Parliament and the monarchy. Okay. England had already shown her jealousy of Ireland with the Irish Cattle Act and the Navigation Acts. In 1696, the English forbade the direct imports of goods from America to Ireland, decreeing that they had to enter and leave a British port on the way, incurring British handling charges and paying custom duties to the British Treasury. Y'all see where it's coming in at? We steeped in it now. That's right here on this land. Okay? Because what you're going to find, I think you're going to find the English stamp tax. Damn, I got to go get some cigarettes. You're going to find the Stamp Act and the Boston Tea Party and all that shit coming to play off of this stuff right here. Okay? And then also, if you want to look at this, I mentioned this before. the book called The Crucible of Power. And I think I told y'all that was volume 1, but that may be volume 2, okay? Where they talk about the monarch being, no, that's not that one. That's another book. Um, the Crucible of Power, to stay with the text that we're looking at. The Crucible of Power, one of the chapters read, because I think it goes up to the 20th century. I think it ends on the 20th century, so it covers a lot of this independence area, this, that, and the other. But it talked about how on those ships, that because of this, I guess, Navigation Act, if it were, where they were going on the ship, pulling off seamen, holding them hostages, that type of stuff. Those It relates to, I'm trying to remember here, y'all. It relates to like we talk about the Treaty of Morocco. A lot of people reference the Treaty of Morocco. A lot of Moors have talked about the one with Tunis and Tripoli and Algiers, Morocco, and then I think it might be one more. I think it's like 5 or 6 of them. I think it's 5. And how in this one article that when the ships dock, you had to give them safe docking or something like that for repairs. All that stuff comes into this play right here with this. But in the Crucible of Power, they also mentioned that because they were trying to circumvent different people being able to move supplies under this act right here, that a non-British person or a non-American, if you would, could pay $1 to be made American, okay, or British. I can't remember which one it was, but they could pay $1. And the reason why I mention that is because in our narrative of what we hear about who the Indians are, we'll call them $5 Indians because of the history that we hear here on the shore. But on the water, you had a $1 American. And when I read that, that's where that quote came from, a $1 American. And it's directly related to this right here, where they wanted their extra taxes to be able to get extra taxes, and that the ship had to go through Britain before it came here to get those extra fees and charges. Okay, so this and that go hand in hand. That's the Crucible of Power. It's probably closed up on my book. I mean, on my channel, but I did read from that book to show that because I wanted the people to know about that years ago. So you had that going on right there. And people being held for ransom and stuff. Let me see what y'all said here. Okay. You said, that's what I'm saying. That's how we always was in America. It was always us as one. And then you said they was basically extorting them. They have to pay, and some of them have to go to jail for the captain to pay for them. Yep. It says, to continue. Let me go back to the paragraph. It says, I'll go back up a sentence. England had already shown her jealousy of Ireland with the Irish Cattle Act and the Navigation Acts. In 1696, the English forbade the direct import of goods from America to Ireland, decreeing that they had to enter and leave a British port on the way, incurring British handling charges and paying customs duty to the British Treasury. Notice how they say it had to go from America to Ireland, but we don't even see that sometimes. We only see them coming from over there to over here. But it's the other way as well. Okay. By such time goods reach Ireland, they were prohibitively expensive. Next, England attacked the Irish woolen industry, which, although it was tiny in comparison with the English one, aroused the jealousy of the English manufacturers who saw themselves being undercut in continental markets. This is interesting because now you got to go into the wool acts. Thank you, DJ ZPE, 0 Point Energy, that is, for telling me to look at the wool acts, okay? And y'all should look at that as well. No, I didn't quit smoking. Now, man, I'm telling you, you really do good be looking back at the things that you talk about. I had to. I told them suckers, if I ask you a question, you can't give me an answer. Don't be mad when I go get it for myself. Got tired of asking questions and just sitting there twiddling my thumbs because niggas can't stay focused. Okay, let's continue. In 1699, the English Parliament legislated to prevent the export of woolen goods from Ireland to any country except England. And the English industry was, of course, protected by high customs duties. By way of compensation, the budding linen industry was encouraged to grow. But Ireland, but Ireland's Protestant middle class of merchants and manufacturers had learned their lesson. Any Irish enterprise which competed with English trade or manufacture would be siphoned at or stifled at birth. Ireland must always be poorer than England. Let me stop here because right here, when you're talking about the wool and the linen, I'm sorry, I laughed because I remember in the biblical text where it told you not to mix cloths. Y'all remember that part? Where you're not supposed to, or should they say it this way? You're not supposed to bathe a lamb in its mother's milk, and you're not supposed to mix cloths, linen and wool. I don't think it says wool, but this is what it's talking about in the biblical text. Okay. But I know some people back 6,000 years ago with the Hebrew Israelites wandering the deserts of the Arabian desert and all this other shit, but they're not putting it into modern medieval history, our very recent medieval history of a few hundred years ago. They're not putting it there, but that's where it belongs. Okay. It says the demise of the Irish woolen industry at the hands of the English Parliament provoked a member of the Irish House of Commons, William Molyneux, Molyneaux, into publishing a pamphlet entitled "The Case of Ireland's Being Bound by Acts of Parliament in England Stated." Okay, that's the name of it, in which he argued that if the English Parliament might bind Ireland, it must also be allowed that the people of Ireland ought to have their representatives in the parliaments of England. What is it? What they call it? Taxation without representation? That part. That, however, the English Parliament would not allow it. That, however, the English Parliament would not allow it. It regarded itself as an imperial, not national parliament, with a right to legislate directly for its colonies, such as Ireland, and to supervise all administrative matters. Then, in a famous lawsuit about an inheritance, Sherlock versus Annesley, Sherlock versus Annesley, Annesley, the judicial authority of the Irish House of Lords was overthrown. One disputant appealed against a decision of the Irish House of Lords to the English Lords, and the Irish judgment was overturned. The Irish were furious. But in 1719, the English Parliament ratified the decision in a declaratory act. Okay, and it says in a declaratory act, but it is spelled properly. So I don't know if that's the actual name because it doesn't give you a date, but it calls it the Declaratory Act. But instead of calling it the definitive article Declaratory Act, it calls it a Declaratory Act with a proper term. So this may be a little bit of a play on words, so you can't find it, but you know, that was in the year 1719. So anyway, the Irish were furious, but in 1719, the English Parliament ratified the decision in a declaratory act, quote, for the better securing of dependency of the Kingdom of Ireland on the Crown of Great Britain, end quote, declaring it had authority to make laws of sufficient force and validity to bind the kingdom and the people of Ireland. And the Irish Parliament could do nothing about it. Let me take another pause because I'm remembering something that I wanted to say earlier and bring this into play. There have been people who have said that when these folks came over here, you know what, you guys, I I gotta go get some cigarettes. Okay. So we gonna walk a little bit. I'm put my socks on. We gonna walk a little bit. I'm running here, get me some cigarettes, and then we can finish. I don't know if I can turn my truck off yet. That's the issue though. Yes, I got a bad habit. Had it all my life, damn near. But what they said was that in times past, when these folks were coming over here, that when they started working alongside of us, remember in this chapter, we just read that they were putting taxes on products coming out of America going to Ireland. Okay. Now, with anything that we do, we can see it today. So if we can see it today, we can see it yesterday. It may have a timestamp when it started, but we can still see it. That you're going to bring people in most familiar with certain things. So it's no question that some Irish made they way over here into agricultural places where the wool was done, where other products were harvested, this, that, and the other. It's no question that people said, to hell with this, and however they made it over here, stowaway or otherwise, they made it over here. But at some time in this narrative of the Catholic Church and they bullshit, um, Irish people were brought over here, even to the point where we would say that the Irish were the first slaves, as in black masters, white slaves, okay, or the like in any regard as far as that's concerned, or even the chimney sweeps where they were using children and didn't care if they died cleaning out their the elite houses of chimneys and this, that, and the other. Either way, the Irish came over here and they worked side by side with us, and this is before the whole black, white, at least I'm not a nigga type narrative came into play. So they work side by side with us. And some people online, social media in particular, hey, live and learn, said that when the Irish worked alongside of us, they were cool with it. As you can see right here, we not sounding like we the problem, but some people around us is the problem. The regulators, legislators, the administrators, and church clergy and this kind of shit. But working side by side with us, they didn't have a problem with us, okay, for the most part. And the freedom that they really experienced with us in terms of religion, they liked it better than what they were receiving elsewhere. So this leads to the narrative where they say, hey, they came over here for freedom of religion. Well, some of them did come over here because they were being oppressed, and others came over here because they were trying to take advantage of the situation that we're now reading about. So what they were saying in times past is that they worked side by side with us. Okay, it wasn't a matter of you fell down and got with another people and they no, some people worked side by side with us that were of a lighter skin, a different skin, or maybe of the same skin, just of a different nationality or originating from a different region. And what ended up happening, excuse me, what ended up happening is that the Catholic Church realized that they were losing their puppets, their poverty stricken workers, their laborers that they were subjugating, like we just read. And so the Catholic Church, I'm sorry, we know these people as Protestants. Okay. So the Catholic Church ended up sending out their clergy to gather back in all of those Protestants. So when we say, hey, how are you Protestant today, or Kojic, or Baptist, and this, that, and the other, and you still kind of sound like you might be Catholic, this is the reason why, okay? Because the Catholics sent out their missionaries to rein back in the Protestants that they lost in this narrative right here, okay? But I wanted to say that because something in that last sentence kind of um, rang true. Man, y'all, I'm getting ready to try something. I don't know if this is going to be the best move to make, okay? But I don't want to turn my truck off because I'm scared it might not turn back on. But I need to go in this store. 'Cause shit, it's already 111 goddamn degrees over here. Fuck. Whew, Jesus. Okay. What'd you say? Shh. Who you told to be quiet? Okay. Let me peep around for a quick second. I don't like doing this shit. But let's see what we can maybe accomplish here. I'm gonna walk in the store. We're gonna take a little break here. If you would, go grab me some stuff. Ah, shit. Damn, Should I not? How much further do we have to go? Because yeah, we got several pages to go through. Let's put it off for a minute and let me keep reading as not to have y'all waiting. Okay. We're on page number 174. Try to maintain a little discipline around here for a quick second. Okay. Um, where are we at? Okay, so here, I'm sorry, I know I talk in the middle of this so much. The Irish were furious, but in 1719, the English Parliament ratified the decision in a declaratory act for the better securing of the dependency of the Kingdom of Ireland on the Crown of Great Britain, declaring it had authority to make laws of sufficient force and validity to bind the kingdom and people of Ireland, and the Irish Parliament could do nothing about it. The Protestants who made up Ireland's Parliament felt they could not survive amongst the sea of Catholic enemies unless they were staunchly loyal to England, and they were quite prepared to do the Viceroy's bidding as long as he did not ask them to ease the laws against Catholics and Presbyterians. The English Viceroys was sent to Ireland to carry out English policies to achieve English aims. Holding splendid court in Dublin Castle, he dispensed patronage and favors to the Protestant oligarchy, which in return managed Parliament as he wished. In Ireland, as in England, there were many ancient constituencies with hardly any electors. Nowadays, constituency boundaries are redrawn every few years to take account of the movement of population, but in the 18th century, many of them were medieval. Some cities which had grown up recently, such as Londonderry, were scarcely represented at all, while towns which had disappeared centuries before still returned members to the House of Commons. And it's kind of like they saying that with the Social Security thing, you had people that was 150, 200 years old still on the rolls getting a check. Same shit. These pocket boroughs, were controlled by the local magnate who nominated the candidate who would best serve his interests. The House of Commons had 300 members, of whom 178 held seats in the possession of about 30 rich men. Parliamentary sessions were the occasion of a gay social whirl, and whirl is WHIRL, not as in the whole world, globe, this, that, and the other, but in a swirling, okay? Parliamentary sessions were the occasion of a gay social whirl, with much jockeying for position behind the scenes rather than tough decisions of the country's needs. So it don't look like women are the problem. It just looks like people in power are the problem, okay? Talking about a conversation I had with somebody about women being in charge. It says, behind the beautiful townhouses of Georgian Dublin and the fine colonnaded public buildings were narrow medieval streets of rotting, malodorous tenements inhabited by Dublin's poor. The worst of these districts, known as, oh, catch this right here, y'all. Okay, catch this terminology right here. I'm going to start it over again and pay attention. Behind the beautiful townhouses of Georgian Dublin and the fine colonnaded public buildings, which were narrow medieval streets of rotting, malodorous tenements inhabited by Dublin's poor. The worst of these districts, known as the Liberties. Think how that plays out. Liberties, libertarian, liberals, Statue of Liberty, Libertà with the French. Think how that plays out in this narrative. Because remember, the English, not only were they against these Irish folks, they were also against the French. We read that earlier in the chapter. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. The worst of these districts, known as the Liberties, was where weavers lived, who had been thrown out of work when the English Parliament destroyed the Irish woolen industry. It laid between St. Patrick's Protestant Cathedral and the rambling Deanery House, Deanery, Deanery House. And every day the dean made his way through the filthy lanes on foot, distributing coins to the beggars and noting with passionate concern the wretchedness of the people. The dean of St. Patrick's was Jonathan Swift. I'm sorry. You know, we got a joke out here in the trucking industry. They say, sure wish I would have finished training. It's a trucking company out here named Swift. Any correlation? Probably. Okay. And then the other thing that comes to mind with that last sentence, that he was distributing coins to the beggars and noting with passionate concern the wretchedness of the people. New Testament, where they say they were begging for alms. Okay. Alms for the poor. Okay. Yeah. And where did he come out of? St. Patrick's Protestant Cathedral. I'm just saying, y'all. I'm just saying. Okay. Though he was born in Ireland of Anglo-Irish parents and spent nearly 7 years as a student at Trinity College, Dublin, Swift detested Ireland. He abhorred the hopelessness of the place and the uselessness of effort. As soon as he could, he escaped to England, where his political satires on behalf of the English Tory party made him famous. He hoped to be rewarded with a comfortable English bishopric and was deeply disappointed when, in 1713, he was given the Dublin deanery. Okay. For 7 years, he lived obscurely. And then in 1720, the misery of the weavers prompted him to write an anonymous pamphlet entitled A Proposal for the Universal Use of Irish Manufacture, which contained a resounding injunction to the Irish to burn everything from England except their coal. Their coal, COAL. He was telling the Irish people to improve their prospects by buying Irish. Don't we say the same thing, that the black dollar doesn't stay in our community and we should buy black? Uh, to us, such a policy was unexceptionable. All countries urged their citizens to buy the home product. But 18th century Ireland was a market for England, and the Irish government prosecuted the printer, as they did not know who the author was, for sedition. Juries could often be intimidated into doing what the judge wanted them to do, but not on this occasion. 9 times the jury was sent out to reach a verdict of guilty, and 9 times they refused, whereupon the prosecution was quietly dropped. 3 years later, Swift took up the codgels once more. Cudgels, codgels, once more. For some time, Ireland had been short of small coins. The Irish had asked repeatedly for their own mint, but since Charles II's time, coins for Ireland had been minted in England, and in 1720, George I granted a patent to mint 108,000 pounds worth of copper halfpennies and farthings to his German mistress, the Duchess of Kendal, and the Duchess sold the patent for 10,000 pounds to an Irish master, William Wood, who reckoned he would make a profit of at least 25,000 pounds on the deal. When the Irish heard of it, they were extremely angry, and Swift, impersonating a draper, ridiculed Wood's mountains of halfpence in the first of four famous tracts, the Draper's Letters. Draper's Letters, Drapier apostrophe S letters, if y'all wanted to read that. Then in the report on the Committee of Inquiry set up in London was leaked and Then a report of a committee of inquiry was set up in London, was leaked and reprinted in Dublin. A second equally virulent Draper's letter appeared, and then a third. Wolfe's effigy was carried through the streets of Dublin, and the new halfpence kept back from circulation. The Lord Lieutenant was recalled. His successor, Lord Cabaret, or Carteret, I'm sorry, Lord Carteret, hastened to Dublin, and Swift issued the fourth Draper's letter. It was not really halfpence the Irish were fighting about, but freedom. By the laws of God, of nature, of nations, or our own country, you are and ought to be as free a people, Swift told the Irish, as your brethren in England. Carteret decided to persecute the author, but though everyone knew the Draper was Swift, it could not be proved, and again the unfortunate printer took the brunt of the attack. Then Swift wrote an open letter to the jury, and they threw the case out. Quite unconstitutionally, a second jury was impaneled, and they not only rejected the case for the prosecution, but Wood's halfpence as well, declaring those who tried to force the halfpence upon Ireland were enemies of His Majesty and the welfare of the kingdom. Afterwards, they put an I in that as well. Piers. They spell it both ways, but when they mention Draper's pence, they put an I after the P. Drapieres, if you want to go that way. Okay. Afterwards, Swift was silent for a while. He had taught the Irish the invaluable lesson that they could defeat England by constitutional means. Then Then between 1727 and 1730, Ireland endured 3 years of famine. The bodies of people who had starved to death laid unburied outside their hovels. And Swift wrote the most grotesquely iconic or ironic of all his tracts. In a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being buried or burdened to their parents or the country. That's the title. He ingeniously advises that 1/4 part of the infants under 2 years old be forthwith fattened as dainty bits for lords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have best right to eat up the children. He was so deeply shocked by the exploitation of the common Irish, which seemed to him next to cannibalism, that he wanted to turn to shock his complacent, well-fed, and especially English readers. Yet Swift was no liberal or Democrat. The poor loved him as they loved no one else, but he saw them as ignorant savages with an absurdly superstitious religion. He believed in the Protestant ascendancy, though not in its cruelties, and in the right of Protestants to lead a free Ireland. He was the first of the new breed of Anglo-Irish Protestant nationalists. Yeah, more than likely, freaking Scots. Anyway, after Swift had spoken, some Presbyterians began, Presbyterians? No. After Swift had spoken, some Protestants began taking their responsibilities more seriously. In 1731, wealthy Protestant clergy and landowner founded the Dublin Society for the Improvement of Agriculture, which set up a model farm, published instructive pamphlets, and offered prizes for good husbandry. Parliament supported the society with grants to be spent not only on encouraging improved agriculture, but manufacturers and fisheries as well. Improving landlords, I'm just going to say right here, We should learn a lesson from these last two pages. And one of those lessons is sitting up there begging is not going to get you anywhere. Okay. Because they would tell you people in hell want ice water. Okay. Anyway, improving landlords became a new feature of the countryside. Some set up small industries on their estates, others reclaimed wasteland to provide holdings for landless laborers, and many more tried to teach good husbandry by example. Then in 1733, special charter schools were set up for the children of the poor. They had strong Protestant bias, which prevented them from becoming popular, but were nevertheless a sign of good intent. Right here, where it says that they had reclaimed wasteland. Wait, is that it? Okay. Reclaimed wasteland to provide holdings for landless laborers, and many more tried to teach good husbandry by example. I want to ask y'all, is that the reason why Booker T had his institution? Where he was over there rubbing elbows with the rich and famous, but had them brothers, I don't know if it was any sisters, but them brothers sleeping on the floor in cots to do agriculture and so-called pull themselves up by their bootstraps and feel and make the rest of humanity feel like they had a right to be named among the nations of men and people and all that stuff. Same shit. I don't know. But it does make you go, Protestant hostility towards Catholics was gradually declining. The 18th century was the age of reason when people valued cool rationality above everything, and abhorred what they call enthusiasm, and we would term fanaticism. Excessive religious zeal came into that category. Though Protestants still considered many Catholic beliefs and practices absurd, they were far more ready than they had been in the past to tolerate them and to give a helping hand to their Catholic neighbors. When Irish Catholics showed no interest at all in supporting James II's descendants, who led re- um, rebellions in Scotland in 1715 and 1745, the Protestants were gratefully prepared to allow the penal laws, though they were not repealed, to fall into abeyance, Abeyancee. The penal laws had never been fully enforced. There was not and never could be the machinery to enforce all of them all the time. But they had done their work. They had enslaved the bulk of the Catholic Irish for their enrichment of their Protestant superiors, and they had also less intentionally encouraged in the Irish the characteristics of slaves: idleness, mediocrity, a protective foolishness, and a light, smiling gaiety that masked a sense of wrong. The penal laws had also eroded what respect the Irish had ever had for the law. Quote, is that a quote or, yeah. Quote, the law does not suppose any such person to exist as an Irish Roman Catholic, end quote. The Catholic Irish, including their leaders, the priests, turned away from a system of law which punished but did not protect them. They ignored and forgot about it and developed a characteristic which has lasted to this day, found their own remedies for injustice in the formation of secret societies. Tories and Rapparees, Rapparees, still haunted the bogs and mountains, especially in the south and west. Between 1711 and 1713, a group known as the Hoggers, Houghers, had terrorized the whole province of Connaught, hogging, however you say that, hogging, or hamstringing, okay, so hogging, hamstringing cattle and driving sheep over cliffs into ravine. Sound like Jesus putting the demon in the pig right about there and running them over a cliff. What did they develop? Secret societies. Okay, got you. Um, Their grievance was the wholesale conversion of arable land into pasture, which threw many small tenant farmers off their holdings. Then in 1759, after a long period of comparative tranquility, Britain lifted the restrictions on the import of Irish cattle, and yet more land was put down to pasture. In Tipperary, whole villages were swept away and the common land enclosed for grazing. A new society of militant peasants was formed, the White Boys. I'm gonna throw this book against the damn. I'm gonna throw this book. I'm gonna throw this book. I'm gonna throw this goddamn book. The White Boys. Damn, is this the 1600 or 1700s version of the Proud Boys? Hey, y'all want to know how to get y'all Proud Boys in line? Pay attention to the story. Damn. Where's my where the bookmark at? Okay, okay. All right. Oh Lord, they got some more boys showing up in here. Okay. Um, oh yeah, some more. Okay. Let's listen to these folks. Okay. Um, a new society of militant peasants was formed, the White Boys, so called because they met at night with faces blackened and white smocks over their clothes, so they could be recognized as a body but not individually. The White Boys pulled down fences, maimed livestock, and punished small farmers who were over subservient to the landlords. Before long, white boys were carried on their were carrying on their activities through most of Munster, Leinster, and Connaught. Only Ulster was free of them until in 1763, the peasants of Armagh, Armagh, and Londonderry, styling themselves Hearts of Oak or Oak Boys, were wearing sprigs of oak in their hats. Do y'all know where this comes in at over here? Yeah, the people with the caps and they put a little piece of straw in it because they couldn't afford uniforms. Okay, okay, I hear y'all now. Okay, come on. Um, Oak boys wearing sprigs of oak in their hat attacked landlords for putting too much pressure on them to work on the roads. In 1770, the Earl of Donegal demanded unjustly high fines or premiums for his tenants in Antrim. And I was saying Antrim before, but it's Antrim, Antrim, for the renewal of their leases. Those who could not pay were evicted and replaced. And Hearts of Steel or Steel Boys attacked the property and cattle of the new tenants. You said, wait, hold up, Navi. The white boys put on their black face so they could know who they are and had a sheet. I will read that part again. Uh, da, da, da. A new society of militant peasants was formed. For those of you who get the book or got the book, this is page 178. Um, was formed, the white boys, who called that, so called that because they met at night with faces blackened and white smocks over their clothes, so they could be recognized as a body, but not individually. Yeah, that's it. Didn't say sheet. It said they had a white smock. Okay, um, white smock could be just sleeves are out and it covers your chest, your back, and down your torso. Okay, but not the full white suit, if you would. But yes, their faces were blackened so that you couldn't see them as night. So what are you going to see? All you're going to see is the white boys. Or their smock sheets. Yeah, yeah. You there, Casino. You there. Okay. Let's see. Where were we at here? Okay, so the Steel Boys attacked the property and cattle of the new tenants. Okay. The White Boys, Hearts of Oak and Hearts of Steel, and other organizations which followed them were not patriotic or were not patriot or freedom movements. Irish peasants still dreamed of King James, but their societies were mainly concerned with such local tyrannies as the harshness of a landlord, the rapacity of tithe proctors who were collecting for a clergy of people considered alien and uh, heretical, and less often Catholic priests who charged exorbitant fees. Sometimes they attacked their oppressors directly. In County Cork, landowners and their resident agents had to keep their windows shuttered and their doors barricaded against the white boys who roamed the countryside in armed bands of 5 to 500 men. More often, more often, though, the secret societies attacked the weaker peasants who paid the exorbitant tithe or the higher rent. Those or courtiers who, through the pressure of their needs or their own frivolity, could not stand up to tyrannical superiors, were caught in a cruel dilemma. If they refused the extra rent or the renewal premium, they lost their holding and their livelihood. If they paid it, the society took its revenge. All the societies carried out secret oathing ceremonies. All the societies carried out secret oathing ceremonies. Okay. Um, Often forcing their oath upon unwilling recruits. Their leaders were shadowy figures who went under pseudonyms such as Captain Eves or Captain Starlight. One pseudonym, one pseudonym, sometimes covering several men. The local people had no way of knowing who the members who were members and who were not, or where the gangs might strike next, but they knew their methods. The old warning to children, quote, watch out or these fairies will get you, end quote, goes back to those times. Fairies was the country name for society members, and what the fairies did was to hamstring cattle, pull down houses, burn ricks and barns, fire shots into houses, deliver threatening letters, and apply torture to those who fell foul of them, branding them, cutting off bits of their ears, and wool carding, or drawing the steel comb used through wool through the victim's flesh. If ooh, don't be so rambunctious, casino, because mm, because you just said it was the brothers that was terrorizing the Irish over there, and maybe supporting what the one brother said that it was the brothers that started the KKK back in history. Mm. Oh, now that part I'll go with. Yeah, got their understanding of things. Uh-huh. Down to the cutting off the bits of ears. I'm sorry, testicles, ears, and wool carding. I don't know what wool carding is. Um, Damn. Okay. Irish peasants had been impoverished, degraded, exploited, and brutalized. When they made war upon their superiors in the only way they could, by combining into what amounted to primitive trade unions, it was inevitable that the cruelty of their methods would match the cruelties that had been practiced among them or upon them. There's some crazy shit right here, boy. Ooh, there's some crazy shit. Yeah, yeah, I got you. I got you. What you said earlier. Okay. In the towns, things were looking up. In the towns, things were looking up. Britain was still afraid of Irish competition. Even the linen industry, which had been fostered to compensate Ireland for the loss of the woolen industry, was hampered when the British Parliament, pressed by Scottish linen woolers or weavers, damn, um, excluded Irish colored linens from the British market. And when Ireland started their own brewing, Britain forbade the importation of hops, which did not grow well in Ireland, from any country except herself, and at the same time increased the duties upon them. Let me read that again. In the towns, things were looking up. Britain was still afraid of Irish competition. Even the linen industry, which had been fostered to compensate Ireland for the loss of the woolen industry, was hampered when the British Parliament, pressed by Scottish linen weavers, excluded Irish colored linens from the British market. And when Ireland started their own brewing, Britain forbade the importation of hops, which did not grow well in Ireland, from any country except herself, at the same time increasing the duty on them. The price of Irish beer, the price of Irish beer was pushed up. The native industry declined, and the beer drunk in Ireland mostly came from England. I laugh right there because I was actually trying to look at Sinners again, the movie Sinners, and when Smokestack, yeah, when Smokestack rolled into town to get the harmonica player, he was telling him he has some good old Irish Chicago beer. Shall we mention O'Mallory's Cow again? Never mind. I'm just saying. Damn. Okay. Let's go further. Okay, mostly came from England. A budding glass industry was similarly hampered. In 1746, Britain forbade the import of Irish glass to any country whatsoever. Nevertheless, a growing Catholic middle class was finding new opportunities for itself. All those educated young Catholics prevented by the penal laws from making careers in the law or public service were putting their skill and energy into business ventures. They built up the provisions trade, started in the 17th century by exporting corn, oats, meat, and fish to the continent and provisioning ships for the Atlantic crossing. Warships, hold on, there's a fly in here. I'm gonna catch his ass in just a minute. Hold on. Get out my truck. Get out. Okay, got you. Okay. Uh, where was I at? Did I lose a page? No. Skills to work in business ventures. Okay, got you. Warships of both French and English navies were provisioned in the beautiful harbor of Cork. Just to talk about harbors, I'm not sure where Queen Anne was and Queen Elizabeth was, but in the history of gambling, one of the lotteries that was pulled either by Queen Anne or Queen Elizabeth, I think one funded Jamestown through lotteries, or should I say gambling, and the other one, yeah, that part, and the other one, their lotteries or gambling was used to um, fix, spruce up, recreate, or create Queen Anne's harbors. And I think it was to restore. I think it was to restore her harbors. I think that was Queen Anne's harbors that they were talking about there. Okay. But let me read that sentence again. Warships of both French and English navies were provisioned in the beautiful harbor of Cork. The Navigation Acts, which had restricted trade with America and the West Indies, was eased, and when in 1759 the English allowed Irish cattle into Britain, the trade in beef, butter, tallow, and hides took a leap forward. Now, the thing that I want you to keep in mind here is the Pitchfork Rebellion or the Bannockburn Rebellion, because this is happening about this same time. So when they say what Atlantic crossing, that's probably what you're talking about when the people start coming over here. In the mid 1750s. Okay. Um, and I think that's the date for that. And also remember that when it comes to the Scots, the Irish, the English, and the like in that narrative, that for one group, the 1800s is the 1700s, or the 1700s or the 1600s. So we're talking about two different people and possibly two different timelines, but could be talking about the same point in history. Okay. Because like my neighbor thinks it's the 1800s while I'm saying it's the 1700s. That's what I'm talking about. So you could be talking about the Pitchfork Rebellion or the uh, Bannock, Bannockburn or Bannockbrook Rebellion, something like that. Okay. So let's go here. Let's finish. The Navigation Acts, which had restricted trade with America and the West Indies, were eased. And when in 1759 the English allowed Irish cattle into Britain, the trade in beef, butter, tallow, and hides took a leap forward. Some Catholic merchants became exceedingly rich, far richer in terms of money and goods, though not, of course, in land, than their Protestant overlords in the Irish Parliament. The Protestant middle class that also developed was largely a Presbyterian one, derived from the Presbyterian peasants who had settled in Down and Antrim. Ulster peasants were never as wretched as Irish peasants elsewhere. All foreign travelers remarked upon that. It was worth their while to work hard and improve their holdings because they enjoyed what was known as the Ulster custom, which was the right to sell their tenancies. And many of them had a second string to their bow. The linen yarn spun in the cabins of Connaught was sent to Ulster to be woven. Nearly every farmhouse had a loom in the living room where the farmer's family made cloth to be bleached and furnished or finished by the linen drapers at Belfast. The Anglo-Irish gentry and aristocracy, the Protestant oligarchy which ran the country, was becoming more and more unhappy about the powerlessness of the Irish Parliament. Swift had voiced the feelings of all Irish Protestants when he declared Ireland to be the sister kingdom to England, England's equal under the crown, and in no way subject to the English Parliament. Wait. Swift had voiced his feelings of the Irish Protestant when he declared Ireland to be the sister kingdom to England, England's equal under the crown, and no way subject to the English Parliament. Why? If he was a free man in England, should he become a slave? He asked after a 6-hour crossing. Oops. Isn't this the same narrative that they used for Dred Scott? Oh, but he went over into Missouri, and because it was a free state, he petitioned the government to be free. This, that, and the other. Isn't this the same thing? Isn't this also um, kind of apropos of when they had discussions about an Englishman having his laws go with him wherever he goes? Okay. Um, yeah, that's in here, y'all. That's in here. Okay. But as he says, why, if he was a free man in England, should he become a slave? He had asked after a 6-hour sea crossing. I'm just wondering. Um, were they going to from England to Ireland, or were they going from the pond, if you would, to Americas in them 6 hours? I don't know if this is the Atlantic crossing right here yet. Okay. It says Protestant members of the Parliament remembered. Nasir, did I say hey to you? I see you coming in. So, hey, brother Nasir. Okay. Page number 180. Protestant members of the Parliament remembered that. Like, Protestant members of the Parliament remembered that. Ever since the 1720s, Parliament had contained a group called the Patriots, which demanded constitutional rights for Ireland and resisted English encroachment. The Irish Parliament of the 18th century was controlled by a few rich and powerful undertakers who, in return for money, high office, and signatures, undertook to push government business through both houses. Let me stop for a minute and pick up this word undertakers. Undertakers, though they did not say that it was a proper term in here, undertakers is a proper term. Go back 2 chapters, if possible, chapters 6 and 7, and you see where the term undertakers come in at. Okay? See where undertakers come in at. Then tie that to the funeral rites, funeral homes, morticians, and the like of today. Okay? Because we call them undertakers. In the Wild Wild West, they called them undertakers. Now we call them funeral directors. Same motherfuckers. And I got people that I believe are in my family who are mortuary workers. And I'm not talking about all of them. I'm just saying, look at the history, look at the history, look at the history. Okay? And make the necessary corrections and correlations to our history. Okay? So let me read that again. The Irish Parliament of the 18th century was controlled by a few rich and powerful undertakers who, in return for money, high office and senators undertook to push government business through both houses. They were of necessity castle men, just like Root be saying it. Oh, they called them chimney sweeps too? Mm, okay. That's interesting. That'd be a interesting little correlation. The one thing I'm seeing is skilled labor or trade labor in that aspect being connected. But anyway, let's continue. It says they were of necessity castlemen, that is, supporters of the viceroy, but increasingly often they found themselves taking the patriot side and fighting for the rights and independence of Parliament. In 1754, largely due to the trading success of the new middle classes, the Irish government found itself in credit. Parliament decided the surplus should be used to reduce the national debt and sent a bill to that effect to the British Privy Council, only to have it returned with an additional clause saying that the King, George II, had already given his consent to the use of the money. It was a way of claiming that the Irish surplus belonged not to Ireland, but to Britain. And another time, the British could spend it themselves if they wished. In 1753, there was another surplus, and once again, the British Privy Council added a clause to the Irish bill indicating that the money really belonged to Britain. This time, the Irish Parliament fought the bill. One of the undertakers, Henry Boyle, Boyle, rallied the Patriots to his side and, after a considerable struggle, defeated the bill. Boyle was toasted all over the country and in the capital, people went wild with delight. Aristocratic hostesses gave parties, poets wrote odes, and the mob lit bonfires. Boy, okay. Okay, got you. Boyd had shown the Irish people, as Swift had done, that they could get their way. Public opinion could prevail. When the next general election came along in 1760, the people, especially the new Protestant middle classes in the towns, determined to make their views known. Hardly any of them had votes, and they did not demand them. They simply lobbied the candidates so publicly and so vociferously that they had to take notice, and the patriot groups returned to Parliament with a program based on popular demand, which included a reduction in the huge number of people on the Irish pension list. Check this out, y'all. An act of habeas corpus to ensure prisoners were brought to trial instead of being detained indefinitely, and security of tenure for judges. to enable them to reach impartial verdicts. Y'all see it yet? Yes, sir, I do. Yes, casino. Yes, yes, yes. Huh. Okay. And speaking of Swift, the trucking company, I think they just bought out Knight, the other trucking company. I think they merged. Anyway, and I heard some of these groups like England and other groups, they're all fucking related anyway. So anyway, let me continue. Excuse my language. I know it's Sunday. Um, where are we at? The Patriot leaders responsible for putting the program before Parliament was a rich young lawyer named Henry Flood, an amateur actor and a student of the Greek and Roman orators. He was a brilliant speaker, the first of a line of orators which was to give the Irish Parliament the reputation of being the most eloquent assembly in Europe. Let me stop here and again say real quick, they're showing you how to handle certain things in this chapter. They said they didn't sit up here and worry about votes. They lobbied people um, vociferously. They lobbied, okay, the legislators so much that they had to pay notice. But here's the deal, y'all. Would they have been able to do that if they was broke, busted, and disgusted, or was it because they had come up with this surplus of money? To continue, oratory swayed people, but in the battle for the control of the Irish Parliament, it was the machination that got things done. Kind of sounds like a Nancy. Anger gets shit done. Okay, but it was the machination that got things done. In 1776, a new viceroy, Lord Townshend, let it be known that he supported some of the Patriot demands and sent the necessary bills to England. Before they came back, however, he asked Parliament to increase the Irish standing army from 12,000 to 15,000 men. The Irish resented having to raise and pay such numbers when Britain, with a far greater resources, was only prepared to raise 28,000. But the British government was afraid of making itself unpopular at home and preferred, as usual, to shift the burden to Ireland. Then the augmentation of the army bill was put forward. Once again, the undertakers saw it was rejected. They probably thought Townsend would offer them the usual inducements, offices, pensions, and so on, to push such an unpopular measure through. But they had mistaken their man. Townsend was a bluff and convivial soldier, which much like in Dublin society, but he was out to break them. Hold on a second. Once again, the undertakers saw it was rejected. They probably thought Townsend would offer them the usual indictments or inducements, offices, pensions, and so on to push such an unpopular measure through. But they had mistaken their man. Townsend was a bluff and a convivial soldier, much liked in Dublin, but he was out to break them. In 1768, after a general election, Townshend put the augmentation of the army bill before the House of Commons, and once again the undertakers saw it was rejected. Then they had a government money bill thrown out because the House had not initiated it, and immediately brought in an identical money bill which passed through both houses, as well as the augmentation of the army bill. The Irish Parliament had made its point. It was not prepared to be a rubber stamp, but Townshend would not tolerate such independence. He prorogued Parliament, deprived the chief undertakers of their lucrative posts, and gave them instead to those who had supported the government. When Parliament reassembled in 1771, the government was in control and the power of the undertakers broken. Townshend's popularity vanished and he left Ireland in 1772. It became the chief secretary's task to manage Parliament, and the next holder of the office, Sir John Blair. I'm going to spell it because I feel like playing with this word, but I will spell it. Blaqüiere. In our language, it would be blacker, but it's bloquear, okay? Who was successful at all opposition ebbed away. Wait. Townsend's popularity vanished, and he left Ireland in 1772. It became the chief secretary's task to manage Parliament, and the next holder of the office was Sir John Blackyer, who was so successful, there it is, was so successful that all opposition ebbed away. In 1775, even Flood, and that would be Henry Flood, for 15 years the leader of the Patriots, accepted a government post. A man of firmer character would have maintained his independence, and 3 months later, to Flood's chagrin, just such a man came into the House of Commons and took over the Patriot leadership. He was by far the greatest of the Irish parliamentarians, Henry Grattan. Okay, Grattan. Grattan had much in common with Flood. He was a lawyer, a student of ancient as well as modern orators, and a brilliant speaker. Flood, being tall and good looking, had a better presence than Grattan, who was a slight, unprepossessed figure with a thin, sharp voice and graceless gestures. And Flood could probably lead the House through the twists and turns of a complicated argument better than Grattan. But Grattan had imagination and he had warmth. He reached out to the people in a simple, direct way and swept his hearers along and on the tide of his passionate enthusiasm. Flood believed, like most Protestants, in the supreme value of the ascendancy. He was prepared to give Catholics relief from the penal laws, freedom to worship as they chose, and economic concessions, but he was adamant that they should not have political power. Grattan was more generous and declared that the Irish Protestant could never be free till the Irish Catholic has ceased to be a slave. He saw that Ireland would never be free of control by the British Parliament so long as there was a division into two nations, the Protestant and the Catholic. And Catholics had been quiescent for decades. They seemed to have forgotten their confiscated lands and their dreams of rescue by a foreign power so completely that the Protestants were reassured. There were Catholic clergy all over the country, bishops, monks, friars, as well as parish priests. Handsome Catholic churches had gone up and were openly attended. In 1759, when Britain had been fighting the 7-Year War against the Catholic powers, France and Austria, Irish Catholics had sent their loyal addresses to the Lord Lieutenant. And when the following year a French force captured uh, um, Carrickfergus in Ulster, the Catholics never stirred. From 1768 onwards, Catholics offered prayers in their churches for the British king. To most of Ireland's Protestants, Catholics had ceased to be enemies and became compatriots. Over the years, the penal laws had been eased. In 1772, a measure known as the Bog Land Act was passed, which allowed Catholics to take leases up for 61 years instead of 31 allowed under the penal law on unprofitable land, so that they could reclaim and develop it. In 1778, the greater part of the Anti-Popery Act of 1704 was repealed. Catholics were allowed a oh shit. This is ridiculous. I'm gonna start this paragraph over again. Over the years, the penal laws had been eased. In 1772, A measure known as the Baldwin Act was passed, which allowed Catholics to take up leases for up to 61 years instead of the 31 allowed under the penal laws on unprofitable land, so that they could reclaim and develop it. In 1778, the greater part of the Anti-Popery Act of 1704 was repealed. Catholics were allowed 999-year leases. A Protestant son ceased to be able to depossess his Catholic father, and a Catholic landlord no longer had to divide their land equally among their sons. Catholics were also allowed to become schoolmasters, provided they only taught Catholic children. But in 1782, a bill to legalize marriages between Catholics and Protestants was defeated. The Irish Parliament considered the position of Presbyterians considered the position of Presbyterians too. It was inappropriate to disburden Catholics without doing the same for dissenting Protestants, and a clause abolishing the sacramental test was put into the Catholic Relief Bill of 1778, the measure which canceled the greater part of the Anti-Popery Act. But the British Privy Council struck the clause out. Ever since 1718, when the first cheap leases granted after the Battle of the Boyne had fallen in, Presbyterians had been emigrating to the West Indies, where hundreds of plantation owners were from Ireland and to North America. They were pioneers and the sons of pioneers, and when their legal disabilities chafed too sorely or the demands of their landlords grew too great, whenever the harvest failed or the linen industry took a plunge, they packed their bags and moved on. Before long, thousands of Presbyterians had friends and relatives in America. Tales of American religious freedom and limitless opportunities kept on coming back to them. They knew what America stood for, and that disturbed the British government. For in 1778, sympathy with America was also treason. 3 years later, American colonists had clashed with British troops at Lexington, Massachusetts, and the American Revolution had begun. hmm Irishmen, we're at the end of page 85, 185. Irishmen, Protestant and Catholic, as well as Presbyterian, understood only too well why the Americans had rebelled. Had Irishmen not suffered like the Americans for British commercial jealousy and restrictive practices? Let me put this in perspective, give you a book for that statement. 7 years residency in the great deserts of North America, in the part where it talks about the Cherokee and the Choctaw, if you would, in that section. I think it's like page 15. Make sure you get the right volume. Um, they talked about, and I read up here online, how the government, aka these British folks that we're looking at right here, over here on American shores, how they were jealous of the Cherokee holdings that they had, that the Cherokee could vote, but the new ones and other ones could not. um, and then how they forced that dissemination of seeding of lands and stuff that was mentioned in there. So when they say here, had Irishmen not suffered like the Americans from the British commercial jealousy and restrictive practices? Who are they talking about? Okay, because the Cherokee could vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, I got you, brother. All right, so here we got some more mixed and mingled. See how mixed and mingled everything else what is? Catholics, Protestant, Presbyterians, um, people pretending to be either or in that regard. So we're looking at the same thing that's getting ready to fall down here. Okay, what you say? That's what I don't like when people try to say Cherokee are for pink people when they came part of assimilation that the Cherokee wasn't going for. Yeah, because then you got the Anglo-Cherokee War, just like you got the Anglo-Irish, Anglo. Yeah, that all comes in there. Anyway, let's continue reading. Okay, let's continue reading. Where was that? American Revolution was born. Irishmen, Protestant and Catholic, as well as Presbyterian, understood only too well why the American had rebelled. Had the Irishmen not suffered like the Americans from British commercial jealousy and restrictive practices? When American demonstrators called themselves the Sons of Liberty, emptied 342 chests of tea. I told you it was going to come in here. 342 chests of tea into the waters of Boston Harbor in protest at the British tea monopoly. A chord was struck in every Irish breast, and the American rally cry of no taxation without representation was an echo of a statement made by William Molyneux. I spelled his name before, much earlier in the century, that to tax me without consent is little better, if at all, than downright robbing me. End quote. The Irish could see both sides. When the Parliament government supporters referred to the Americans as rebels, the Patriot opposition fought hard to have the references withdrawn. At the same time, both Protestant and Catholics displayed a warm emotional loyalty to Britain in her hour of need. And the British, who certainly did not want another America on their doorstep, responded with concessions, new fishing rights, an easing of the navigation acts, fresh relief acts for Catholics, and in 1780, the removal of the uh, sacramental test for Presbyterians, a religious IQ test. Hey, Jim. Okay. Almost at the end, you guys. A couple more pages, about three more pages. Three? Yeah, three. Um, the most important of these concessions was an act allowing the Irish to raise a Protestant militia. France, Spain, and Holland had come into the war on the American side. There was a serious danger of invasion, and yet nearly all the troops in Ireland had been withdrawn for foreign service. The government could do nothing to defend the country. Pirates and privateers swarmed round the lengthy Irish coast, sometimes capturing Irish ships within sight of the ports. And in April 1778, a well known American privateer, Paul Jones, sailed into Belfast Lough, Lough, seized a Royal Navy vessel or naval vessel, and made off with it. The people of Belfast appealed to the Lord Lieutenant for help, only to be told that there was none available except half a troop of cavalry without horses and half a troop of invalids. They must protect themselves. Give me a second, you guys. I need to clear my cavities here. Give me a second. I'm back. Give me a second. I found a Reese's on the way to the back. Okay. Um, they must protect themselves. Belfast Belfast had formed its own troop of volunteers in 1777, and there were others in Wexford and Kings County. Now, these small groups expanded more or less spontaneously into a militia that covered the whole of Ireland. Ulster, I shouldn't have ate that because my mouth is watering. Every time I stop talking, it's just, yeah, and chocolate is good. It's good. Anyway, now these small groups expanded more or less spontaneously into a militia that covered the whole of Ireland. Ulster Presbyterians, who were afraid not so much of stray American pirates as the Papist French, recruited vigorously. Presbyterian ministers often accepted military rank and dressed up in colorful uniforms. Elsewhere, the larger landowners had already formed their own tenants into armed companies to combat the white boys, and it was easy to transform these bands into a militia. There was tremendous enthusiasm everywhere. Everybody who was anybody was given a military rank. Every old soldier found himself drilling squads of recruits, and subscriptions were raised to buy muskets, brightly colored uniforms, and even a few cannons. By the summer of 1779, Ireland had over 40,000 men under arms, and a year later, nearly 80,000. You know what I just thought when they said that the Ireland, that they couldn't, when they said that they could not um, send troops to protect that one group of people, they had to protect themselves, the group of people uh, in Belfast, when they said that they couldn't protect themselves, or they had to protect themselves and they couldn't send troops because the Irish had been sent to fight in foreign lands, that's because the Irish had been sent the fuck over here. Remember? No, is that the Revolutionary War? I don't know if that's the Revolutionary War, but it's in Hollywood, so I'm trying to figure out which one it is. But I remember them getting off the ships and being given rifles and a uniform and being sent into the war. And I want to say that that's the Civil War, but it might have been the Revolutionary War. It might have been, okay? But that's what I'm thinking when they said that the Irish were sent into foreign, you know, was away fighting foreign battles. That might be what's going on here. So let's continue. A lively new hopefulness spread through the country, even affecting Catholics, who, although still ignominiously prevented from defending their country, supported the militia or Irish volunteers, as they were called, with generous subscriptions. Irishmen had never been so united. The volunteers could protect them not only from Britain's enemies, but from Britain herself. Ireland felt a new surge toward independence, a new resolve to be free. At last, Irishmen took Swift's advice, given half a century earlier, and bought, only Irish. Goddamn fly. All the bright scarlet, orange, green, and blue uniforms were made in Ireland of Irish cloth, and society women had a fashion for Irish materials. When Parliament met in October 1779, Grattan immediately moved in resolution, quote, that it would be an inexpedient that it would be inexpedient to grant new taxes, end quote. And without unprecedented boldness, the House of Commons voted money for 6 months only. This goddamn fly. Get out. 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 Stay out. Okay. All right. Had voted money for only 6 months. Let me find where we were. Money for 6 months. Money for 6 months. Okay. Quote, England had sown her laws in dragon's teeth, end quote. One Patriot member observed, quote, and they have sprung up armed men, end quote. Mm-mm-mm. Grattan moved on to make a daring demand for free trade. He had overwhelming support in the country. Government placement in parliament moved to his side, and for the first time in Irish politics, the opposition in the British parliament, led by the liberal orator Charles James Fox and the Irishman Edmund Burke, supported him. I don't know anything about those two guys. Britain was too weak to resist. Restrictions on the woolen industry was lifted. Ireland was allowed to export glass and import hops, to trade freely with any country in the world except the British colonies, and in their case, to charge the same duties as the British did. Let me hold right here, because if what I'm thinking in my head, since they're saying that they couldn't trade in the British colonies, and the British colonies were only 13 colonies, 9 to 13 at that particular time, then is it possible that these so-called Irish that were getting the hell up out of there for whatever reasons were trading with the interior through possibly the French, um, meaning, the Louisiana Purchase area, and before them, and before George Washington went west and started the war with the Indian folks, the French and Indian War, up in there. Um, is it possible? This is a long question. Is it possible that, if the first part is true, that the latter part, when we kind of rubbing elbows and kind of on the same side and mixed and mingled, not twisted and screwed, but mixed and mingled, that this ends up being where what's offered to the, and I'm gonna say it this way, what's offered to the pale skin amongst all these dark skinned folks over here known as Americans, is it possible this is where they start to say that you can be just a tad bit above the Negro if you side with us to help to gain the middle of the country that they were also going to invade as the 13 colonies moved west, leading to the Civil War? Should I say that again, or did y'all catch that? Okay. If the Irish were forbade from giving their wares in the colonies, from trading in the colonies, the American colonies being 9 to 13 colonies with a geographic location, is it possible that the Irish, who saw what we went through and understood both sides, as the book quotes, were actually trading with the interior, aka Indian territory, under French and possibly other, but French, as in the Louisiana Purchase area? Is it possible that they were trading with them, one, and two, that later on in history, the fact that we got along with them through trade or whatever, um, that colonial powers, as they moved west after George Washington, would give the narrative to the pale skin or the Irish that was in the interior, the motivation to say, we'll give you status, meaning you'll be just a little bit above the Negro by calling yourself white. Okay, okay. What you say, right? That's why I said to you at the beginning about Galveston, Texas. Okay, I got you. I got you. Uh-huh. I got you. Okay, I see where you're at now. We there. Okay. We there. Okay. Okay. Let's continue that read. I think that's what's going to lead up to that statement of them offering the so-called Irish or white folks status of being white to bring them in to the British colony part of this narrative. Okay. British English, that kind of shit. But anyway, let's continue reading. We're almost done. Uh, Okay, I'll start that paragraph over. Granton moved on to make a daring demand for free trade. He had overwhelming support in the country. Government placement in Parliament moved to his side, and for the first time in Irish politics, the opposition in the British Parliament, led by the Liberal orator Charles James Fox and the Irishman Edmund Burke, supported him. Britain was too weak to resist. Restrictions on the woolen industry were lifted. Ireland was allowed to export glass and import hops, to trade freely with any country in the world except the British colonies, and in their case to charge the same duties as the British did. It was a tremendous victory. The people of Ireland were overjoyed, but Grattan and the Patriots did not rest there. The British could renew trading restrictions whenever they wished, unless Ireland won full parliamentary independence. What year are we in, y'all? 1778. Next paragraph says in February 1782. So somewhere right in here, we're talking about the Declaration for Independence. Anybody tell y'all that was the Irish that was declaring their independence? Never mind. uh, let's continue. In February 1782, Grattan arranged a convention of some 250 delegates from the volunteers, who met in a parish church at Dungannon, or Dungannon, Dungannon. Flood, which is Henry Flood, who had at last given up his government post, Lord Charlemont, okay, the Ulster peer who commanded the volunteers, and numbers of other leading Protestants adopted almost unanimously resolutions asserting the necessity of legislative independence, declaring Poyning's law to be unconstitutional and a grievance, and demanding parliamentary control of the regular army. A final resolution prepared by Grattan without the approval of either Flood or Charlemont expressed the view, extremely modern for the 1780s, quote, that we hold the right of a private judgment in matters of religion to be equally sacred in others, as in ourselves, end quote. The convention concluded with the revolutionary words which again have the ring of Grattan about them. Quote, we know our duty to our sovereign and are loyal. We know our duty to ourselves and are resolved to be free. End quote. A week later, we're on the last page. A week later, Grattan moved a Declaration of Independence in the House of Commons. The government managed to stall it for a while, and then everything happened very quickly. The Tory government fell in Britain, and the Liberals took over. On the 16th of April, Grattan, who was in poor health, rose from his sickbed and came to a tense and excited house. The public galleries packed with the leading figures in Dublin society, and moved the Declaration of Independence once more. Accompanied by his peculiar lurching gestures, he made the most triumphant speech ever to be heard in the Irish Parliament. Quote, I am now to address the free people, end quote, he declared. Quote, Ireland is now a nation. In that new character I hail her, and bowing to her august presence, I say, Esto perpetua, or perpetua, end quote. In May, the British Parliament, led by Fox, repealed the Declaratory Act of 1719 and amended Poyning's law. Uh, the Irish Parliament had regained its ancient position as the sole legislature for Ireland, and the Irish House of Lords was once again Ireland's Supreme Court. The passage of bills via the Irish Privy Council to the English Privy Council was scrapped. From henceforth, all British bills were to be sent direct for approval or veto to the king. The triumph, does this have anything to do with Triple Crown? Never mind. The triumph of the Patriots was complete. A grateful parliament voted £100,000 to Grattan, yeah, voted, and he accepted £50,000. MPs had, God, another fly. Hold on, y'all. I apologize. Oh, can you leave? Can you leave? No, no, that way. Not that way, you little bastard. There's two of them in here. There's probably three of them in here. I was at a meat packing plant, so they be all around you guys. All right. Finishing up. My apologies. Sent directly to the king. The triumph of the Patriots was complete. A grateful parliament voted £100,000 to Grattan, and he accepted £50,000. MPs had no salaries in those days. He was not a rich man, and the money meant he could devote himself full time to politics instead of having to earn his living at the bar. Next, Parliament voted to provide 20,000 sailors or £100,000 for the British Navy. Britain was weak and tired. Most of the American colonies had gone, but the war still continued. And Ireland wanted to show her friendship and to share, in Grattan's words, not only the freedom of her sister kingdom, but her fate. So, family, that concludes chapter number 8. I know y'all got some stuff out of it. Y'all know I got to go get some cigarettes, so we won't be reading these other 30, 40 fucking pages right now. But I will come back. I'm going to tell you what those titles are, what you have to look forward to as we are officially halfway. We're about halfway through the book, short of a few pages. No, we might be halfway through the book all the way. Okay, so the next one we're gonna start on page number 189, and this chapter is union. As hopefully all of you guys can see what's not being stated from your point of reference as being Americans, American Indians, United States, whatever it is that you are over here in the Americas. I know you can see what's not being said because we're looking at the Irish perspective, but you can see how it relates to each and every one of you. You're welcome, darling. Okay. And how it relates, because after they talk about the Protestant ascendancy, which is what we just read, where they declare their independence simultaneously as there's the Declaration of Independence over here in the Americas. Okay. Then it goes into our next little problem, union. Okay. Union. Okay. Now, I don't know how this one little thing is going to play out in this next chapter when it says something about the American colonies that almost gone. Does that mean that they're moving west? Okay. Because I think this is right around the same time as the Tories, as in the Book of Negroes, when they running through the cities, confiscating Tory lands in the 17th. I think we're dealing with that same little thing right there. Okay. I think we're dealing with that same little thing. So now we're talking about union. Um, I'm sorry. Where's the Continental Congress at, you guys? Is the Continental Congress the English House of Commons or the Parliament? What's going on? Okay. Either way, next chapter starts off. I give you the beginning sentence. Between 1782 and 1800. That's all I'm gonna give you. Okay. Because now we know where we are. Okay. We know where we are right here. Revolutionary War, independence, Constitution. And then I want to put this in your ear, talking about union and also ratification. I want y'all to think about, um, I want to say the Treaty of Peace and Friendship ratified in 1836. I think that's what it was, where they renegotiated something that existed, and I can't remember the actual document, where they renegotiated something that existed in the 1776, 1783 narrative with the Constitution um, into 1836. Different changes happening. I want y'all to also keep in mind, which I know you should be, that in this aspect right here, we are also going to be seeing and looking at, hidden if not talked about, the Indian Removal Act, the Negro Seaman Act of 1822, not, the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the War of 1812. All of this is going, yeah, all of this is going right. You know, this next chapter is precursing this, okay? Um, in that part. So that's what's going to be dealt with in chapter number 9. It's called Union, okay? And then 10, they go into the Great Famine. And just to pick up something from there, it says the famine ravaged Ireland from 1845 to 1848. So now we know that chapter 10 is going to be leading up to Dred Scott. It's going to be leading up to Bridget Biddy Mason going out there to Utah with the Smiths and stuff like that. We know that it's also going to be leading up to or being tied with the Civil War and Dred Scott. All of that's going to come into play in chapter 10 while we're looking at the Great Famine. Now, mind you, if your ass is hungry, don't we have to feed them first before they can pay attention? So, on the other side of that, if we're shooting into war, if you would, are we paying attention to a lot of other things that's going on? Can we expend that much energy to wonder about their great famine over there? I want to see how these two things play into our American history. Okay. Screw the official record. I'm talking about what really happened. And just to water y'all, make y'all mouth water just a little bit. Chapter 11 is the struggle for home rule. Okay. Yeah. This is going to be a good 3 chapters. Looks like it's still in the 1800s. So these going to be a good 3 chapters coming back. I appreciate you guys. I see my numbers are still pretty good for me that you guys are listening, and even my numbers afterwards are pretty good for people who come and listen to this. I know it's difficult to sit up and listen to somebody read where you can't see the words. There's no flashing lights and trinkets and, you know, bells and whistles and neon lights and all that going off. So I appreciate those of you who are disciplined enough and interested enough to actually hear this story like I am, because we gonna change a few things that's being put out here by adding new information. Okay, but I hate to say keep saying but yet if you go back in this chapter and read again, they gave you some definite clues on how to overcome certain things that we are dealing with right now. Okay, because one of the statements in here, it said they took a particular action. And I remember Master Fundifi. I remember Master Fundifi talking about how other people look at us a little crazy because of all the shit that has happened to us. We haven't rose up and done anything, okay, for the most part. And they think that we're mentally ill. Other people think that we're mentally ill for not doing what's necessary. And to a certain extent, we are, because in some aspects, we have what we call psychological paralysis, where they give us so much information that we can't make a move. And then, as they say in the Hegelian dialectic, they create the problem and then come and give you the solution. And I'm going to tell you like this: the solution is not guns and arms and overthrowing governments like that bullshit that they tried on January 6th with those patriots. The key was right there in what they did in Parliament. They didn't ask for the vote. They didn't beg for the vote. They didn't petition for the vote. Now, and we got the shit, but they didn't do any of that shit. They went straight to the lobbyers, to the lobby. But mind you, they had a cushion to do that because they had a surplus. Go back and read or re-listen to that particular part and assess for yourself what it is that we really need to do in relationship to this. Okay? So again, this thing, it's not about black and white babies. Okay? That's part of the Hegelian dialectic. They gave you the problem, and then they're gonna give you the solution. Well, I Robot, how why do they group up like that? Yeah, Vicky is still out here doing AI shit for AI reasons. Okay. Anyway, family, I'm gonna get off here again. I appreciate you guys for coming, for listening. As one person say, I'm patient, having patience, um, letting this stuff digest and marinate, and seeing what people do in the interim. Let me give you a fun fact. Here's a fun fact. Y'all hear me talk about the locusts? See our England looking dead in my mouth now. They open their damn curtains and looking dead in my mouth. But anyway, y'all remember me talking about the locusts, that if you have a thought, that the locusts will come and steal that thought? And I made mention about how I was a little upset that one brother decided to talk about how the Irish became Indian. Yeah, and could you have waited at least until we got there first? But either way, you know, um, let me give you a little fun fact that I learned just last night about the locusts. So I was gonna put something in Smoke Signals chat, because they were doing some shit, and I wasn't getting the conversation. I wasn't gonna do the shit I had done the night before. Excuse me. So I went to look up locusts, and after I looked up locusts, I think I went to bed. But they gave this one video, talked about a cricket, a grasshopper, and a locust. Okay, a cricket versus a grasshopper versus a locust. Okay, I wasn't interested in the cricket part because I was like, wait a minute, a cricket is a small grasshopper, and a grasshopper is wait a minute. Okay, some shit. We're supposed to watch nature, right? Fun fact. So let's put the cricket to the side and let's look at the grasshopper and the locust. On one side, in cinema, they would say, ah, young grasshopper, in the Tai Chi and the karate and all that stuff, right? Young grasshopper, okay? In the real world, for those of us who live in the Midwest, we see a lot of grasshoppers. I'm not gonna say I see shit in California, but I see a lot of grasshoppers in the Midwest because I'm really from Wisconsin. My folks from Arkansas and Mississippi, so we see grasshoppers, right? Got that. In the religious tenets, they tell us about the locusts. Y'all want to know why grasshoppers turn into locusts? Fun fact. Grasshoppers, okay, grasshoppers are basically solitary animals or insects. They might be around each other, but they like their solo, solitary life where they can sit and they can eat on vegetation, and they cute and they green and they just chilling. They real passive. They calm and all this other shit. But the way that they become locusts is when a whole bunch of them get together, like an invasion, like immigration, like migration. Okay, when a whole bunch of them get together, and it says something about they start rubbing their legs, either rubbing the other grasshoppers' legs or rubbing their legs on the other grasshoppers, okay, because they're in close proximity. So this rubbing of the legs on the other grasshopper instead of minding their own damn business causes a change in their characteristics and also in their mental, thank you, and in their mental makeup. Their brain changes, their color changes, and their brain changes. Okay, they start doing zombie like shit. Instead of, I'm just gonna eat this blade of grass and what I need from me, crowds and demons, yes, Carrie, okay. The Verlin for crowds, it's demon, okay. Um, so they instead of just, I'm gonna eat what I need for me and my needs, they decide that they're gonna eat up every damn thing until it's all gone. And it's the same thing. Young grasshopper, little grasshopper, solitary, living, by itself, close to its neighbors, but not overrunning them, is the good side of this insect, whereas the bad side is when they get crowded together like rats, mice, ghetto, populous, mass. I'm sorry, you got what I'm putting down. And then they start rubbing their legs on each other, they come kind of gay. That's what I was thinking last night. They got kind of gay. Hey, stop touching me. But anyway, I was just some thoughts that came up. And then their colors change and their brain changes. Their thinking changes. They become like zombies and now they want to tear up everything. That's what you're looking at. Please pay attention to that when you're looking at people online, because this whole community of trolls and this, that, and the other, them ain't little grasshoppers, bitches. Those are locusts. Okay? Fun fact. Go look it up for yourself. Might find some shit. So that's what happened in the Bible where all them locusts came from, because there's too many goddamn people rubbing up on each other, forcing each other to take other people's legislation, my legislation. Are we different from grasshoppers? And to what extent? Because I think they tried to equate our DNA to being close to a fucking fruit fly at one particular point. I'm just saying, didn't our ancestors tell us to pay attention to nature, or did our ancestors pay attention to nature? But did they ever tell you about the grasshopper and the locust? Family, this is your girl Navi. Right under 3 hours. We did pretty good. I'm going to get on out of here. For those of you who didn't see the first part, please go check out the first part because it's the first few pages. Just like the movie with, man, they already said that it was a jumping spirit out here on social media. But you know how they said with Malcolm X, get your hand out my pocket, locust. That part. I know the movie you're talking about, Casino. But family, y'all enjoy your Sunday. I'm gonna go get me some cigarettes. I think I can turn this truck off. I saw the yard truck, the service truck running around here. So if they got to jump start me to bring me in, they can just add it to their damn bill. Okay. But right now we ain't picked up no load, so the broker gonna be pissed off in a minute. Somebody need to come do something because I'm getting this truck fixed. All right. So, family, y'all enjoy y'all Sunday. I see y'all around these YouTube streets. And watch out for them damn locusts. And if you find one, sink they motherfucking battleship with information. Peace, family. Love y'all. Thanks for coming. Thanks for staying. Thanks for listening. Peace.